The lecture hall was a battlefield, and I was losing. Ethan Caldwell, with his sharp blue eyes and infuriating smirk, leaned back in his chair, tossing out answers like grenades, each one detonating my confidence. By senior year at Emerson University, our rivalry was the stuff of campus legend, a clash of egos that professors whispered about and classmates bet on. I'm Lucas Hayes, a literature major who lived for the written word, for the way a single sentence could unravel a soul. Ethan, a political science prodigy, was my opposite, calculated, polished, always one step ahead. We were neck and neck for the top spot in our class, trading barbs in debates, stealing each other's thunder in seminars. I hated how he made my pulse race, not just with anger, but with something I couldn't name. Our final year project, a joint presentation on social justice in literature, was assigned by a sadistic professor who thought pairing us would spark brilliance. It sparked something. All right, pure chaos. The first meeting was a disaster. We met in the library, surrounded by towering bookshelves that smelled of old paper and ambition. Ethan arrived late, his tie loose, his blonde hair catching the light like he'd stepped out of a magazine. "Hayes," he said, dropping into a chair. "Let's make this quick. I've got better things to do than babysit your metaphors." I clenched my jaw, my dark hair falling into my eyes as I shot back. "And I've got better things to do than decode your ego, Caldwell." The air crackled, our voices low but sharp, drawing glares from nearby students. We argued over every detail, theme, structure, even the font size on our slides. By the end, we'd accomplished nothing but a mutual headache. Days turned into weeks, and our meetings grew more heated. Yet, beneath the barbs, I started noticing things. The way Ethan's hands moved when he talked, precise but restless. The way his laugh, rare as it was, softened his edges. One night, working late in a campus coffee shop, I caught him staring at me over his laptop. "What?" I snapped, my heart doing that stupid thing again. He shrugged, but his eyes lingered, blue and unreadable. "Just wondering how you survive on passion alone, Hayes. It's almost admirable." The word hung between us, a truce in our war, and I didn't know how to respond. The project forced us closer, and I hated how it blurred the lines. We'd stay up late, sprawled across my dorm room floor, papers scattered like battle plans. One night, Ethan showed up with pizza, unprompted. "Don't read into it," he muttered, but he remembered I liked extra cheese. I caught myself smiling, and it scared me. This was Ethan Caldwell, my rival, the guy who'd once called my essay on Whitman sentimental drivel. But as we worked, I saw cracks in his armor, moments when he'd talk about his family, his dad's expectations, the pressure to be perfect. I started sharing too, about my mom's long hours as a nurse, my fear of never measuring up. We were enemies, but we were becoming something else. The presentation day loomed, and we were still a mess. Our arguments had softened, but the stakes were higher now. We needed to win, not just for grades, but for something unspoken. The night before, we rehearsed in an empty classroom, our voices echoing off the walls. Ethan paced, his tie discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up. "You're too emotional, Lucas," he said, but there was no bite in it. I stepped closer, challenging him. "And you're too cold, Ethan. Feel something for once." He froze, his eyes locking onto mine, and the room felt too small. My breath caught as he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, sharp and warm. "You think I don't feel?" he whispered, his voice low, dangerous. I didn't move. Neither did he. That moment changed everything. The air was heavy, charged with something neither of us could name. We didn't kiss not then, but the space between us was alive. Electric. I went home that night, my mind racing, my chest tight with questions I wasn't ready to ask. Ethan was my rival, my opposite, the thorn in my side. So why did I want to close that distance? Why did I lie awake, replaying the way his voice softened when he said my name? The presentation was a triumph, but it wasn't the applause that stayed with me. It was Ethan, standing beside me, our shoulders brushing as we took questions from the panel. For the first time, we weren't fighting each other, we were fighting for something together. As the room emptied, he turned to me, his smirk softer now. Not bad, Hayes, he said. Not bad at all. I grinned, my heart pounding. You're not terrible either, Caldwell. It was the closest we'd come to admitting we weren't just rivals anymore. Graduation came too fast. Ethan got a job offer in D.C., a fancy internship with a senator. I was headed to Chicago for a teaching fellowship. We stood outside the ceremony, caps and gowns flapping in the spring breeze, and I felt a pang I couldn't explain. Don't go soft on me now, Ethan teased, but his eyes were serious. I wanted to say something, anything, but the word stuck. We hugged quick, awkward, final, and then he was gone. I told myself it was for the best. Rivals don't become lovers. That's not how stories work. But stories have a way of rewriting themselves. 2 years later, Chicago was my home, but it felt like a half-finished sentence. I taught high school English, pouring my heart into lesson plans, hoping to spark the same love for words in my students that had carried me through college. But at night, in my small apartment, I'd scroll through social media, catching glimpses of Ethan's life suits, city skylines, a polished smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I tried to move on. I dated a few guys, nice enough, but none of them stuck. None of them challenged me, made me feel that fire in my chest like Ethan had. I told myself it was nostalgia, that I'd built him up in my mind. But then, one rainy October evening, I got an email. Subject, Hayes. You still alive? My heart stopped. It was him. Ethan was in Chicago for a conference, some political summit he didn't care to explain. Meet me for coffee, he wrote. Unless you're still scared, I'll out-talk you. The old spark flared, and I typed back before I could overthink it. Name the place. Caldwell. I'm not the one who runs. We met at a dimly lit cafe downtown, the kind with mismatched chairs and the smell of roasted beans. He walked in, taller somehow, his blonde hair shorter, his suit sharper. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. They found me across the room, and I forgot how to breathe. Lucas, he said, sliding into the booth. No smirk this time, just a small, genuine smile that hit me harder than any of his old jabs. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing like it hadn't in years. He told me about D.C., the late nights, the pressure to climb the ladder. I told him about my students, the kid who'd cried reading The Catcher in the Rye, the way teaching felt like giving pieces of myself away. We laughed, we argued, we fell back into our rhythm. But there was something Nawal weight to his glances, a softness when he said my name. He stayed in Chicago for 3 days, and we saw each other every one. Dinner, walks along the lake, a dive bar where we played pool and he cheated shamelessly. On his last night, we ended up at my apartment, rain pounding the windows. I poured us whiskey, my hands shaking, not from the cold. Why'd you email me? I asked, finally brave enough to dig deeper. He leaned against the counter, his tie loose, his guard down. Because I couldn't stop thinking about you, he said, his voice raw. Not in college. Not after. I tried. Lucas. I really tried. The room went quiet, the rain filling the silence. I stepped closer, my heart hammering. "You're an idiot," I whispered, but I was smiling. He laughed, soft and low, and then he kissed me. It wasn't tentative or careful, it was desperate, like we'd been waiting years for this moment. His hands found my face. My arms pulled him closer, and the world fell away. Ethan Caldwell, my rival, my opposite, was kissing me, and it felt like coming home. We didn't sleep that night. We talked, tangled in each other's arms on my couch, piecing together the years we'd lost. He told me he'd known, even in college, that I was different. "You scared the hell out of me," he admitted, his fingers tracing my jaw. "You made me feel things I didn't know how to handle." I confessed I'd felt it too, that spark I'd buried under pride and fear. By morning, we were exhausted but certain this wasn't a fling. This was real. Ethan went back to D.C., but we didn't let go. Texts turned into calls into weekend visits. Long distance was brutal, missed flights, late-night arguments, the ache of empty beds. But every reunion was worth it. Every touch a reminder of why we fought for this. 6 months in, he got a job offer in Chicago, a policy analyst role he couldn't refuse. "Or maybe I just couldn't refuse you," he said, grinning as he stepped off the plane, his bags in tow. We moved in together, a small apartment with creaky floors and too many books. It wasn't perfect. We fought God. Did we fight over dishes? Over politics? Over whose turn it was to cook? But we laughed just as hard. And every night, falling asleep beside him, I felt a peace I'd never known. Ethan, the man who'd once driven me up the wall, was now the man I woke up with every morning. And somehow, that made perfect sense. But life has a way of testing love, and ours was about to face its biggest challenge. Chicago winters are brutal, but with Ethan, they felt warmer. We'd built a life together, a fragile, beautiful thing made of late-night talks and shared dreams. But by our first anniversary, cracks started to show, not in us, but in the world around us. Ethan's new job was demanding, pulling him into long hours and high-stakes meetings. He thrived on it, his ambition burning brighter than ever. I was proud, but I missed him. My own work was a lifeline, teaching kept me grounded. My students' messy, honest essays reminding me why I loved words. But at home, we were drifting, caught in the grind of bills, routines, and unspoken fears. I started noticing Ethan's silences, the way he'd stare at his phone, his jaw tight. "Just work," he'd say when I asked, but I knew better. One night, over takeout pizza, he dropped the bomb. "My dad's running for office," he said, his voice flat. "State Senate. He wants me to join the campaign." I froze, a slice halfway to my mouth. Ethan's dad, Richard Caldwell, was a political heavyweight, a conservative with a reputation for winning and for hating anything that didn't fit his worldview. Ethan had spent years dodging his shadow, carving his own path. Now, that shadow was creeping back. "What does that mean for us?" I asked, my stomach twisting. Ethan looked away, his blue eyes clouded. "It means complications." He didn't need to spell it out. Richard didn't know about us. Ethan had come out to his mom, who was quietly supportive, but his dad was a different story. To Richard, Ethan was the golden son, destined for greatness, not for a life with another man. Joining the campaign meant stepping back into that world, where our love could be a liability. I wanted to fight for us, to tell Ethan to say no. But I saw the conflict in his eyes, the weight of family, duty, and ambition. "I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice breaking. He reached for my hand, his grip tight. "You won't," he promised. But promises are fragile things. The campaign pulled Ethan away, first in late-night calls, then in weekends spent in his hometown, a small, conservative suburb outside Chicago. I went with him once, against my better judgment. The Caldwell house was a museum of wealth and control, marble floors, framed photos of handshakes with governors. Richard barely acknowledged me, his handshake cold, his eyes assessing. "You're the literature guy?" he said, like it was an insult. Ethan's mom, Ellen, was kinder, her smile warm but strained. At dinner, I sat silent as Richard talked strategy, his voice booming about family values. Ethan's hand found mine under the table, a secret anchor, but it wasn't enough. Back in Chicago, the distance grew. Ethan was distracted, his texts short, his calls rushed. I threw myself into work, grading papers until my eyes burned, but the ache in my chest wouldn't fade. One night, I found him on the couch, staring at a campaign flyer with his dad's face plastered on it. "He wants me to run his media," he said, his voice hollow. "Full-time. Move back home." I felt the air leave the room. "And what about us?" I asked, hating how small I sounded. He didn't answer, just pulled me into his arms, his silence louder than words. We fought that night, our worst yet. I accused him of hiding me, of choosing his dad's approval over our life. He shot back that I didn't understand the pressure, the expectations he'd carried since he was a kid. "I'm trying to protect us," he snapped, but it felt like he was protecting himself. I stormed out, walking the cold Chicago streets, my breath fogging in the air. I loved him, but love wasn't enough if he couldn't choose me. Days later, he came home with a decision. "I'm not moving," he said, his voice steady. I told him I'll help remotely, but my life is here. With you. Relief flooded me, but it was tinged with fear. Richard wouldn't let go that easily, and I knew it. Ethan kissed me, soft and sure, and for a moment, I believed we could weather anything. But then the campaign took a darker turn, and our love became a target. The campaign trail was a minefield, and Ethan was walking it blind. Richard's platform leaned hard into traditional values, a dog whistle that made my skin crawl. Ethan swore he was just managing social media, crafting posts to soften his dad's image. But I saw the toll it took. He'd come home late, his eyes heavy, his shoulders slumped. I wanted to fix it, to pull him back to the man who'd laughed with me over pizza, but I didn't know how. Then the leak happened. A gossip blog, some low-rent outlet sniffing for dirt, posted a blurry photo of us leaving a bar, my arm around Ethan's waist. The caption was vicious: "Caldwell's son living a secret life." My stomach dropped when I saw it. Ethan's phone buzzed nonstop. His dad, his mom, campaign staff. He stared at the screen, his face pale. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. Richard called an emergency meeting, and Ethan insisted I come. We drove to the Caldwell house, the silence between us thick with dread. Richard was waiting in his study, his face a mask of fury. "Explain this," he demanded, tossing a printout of the article on the desk. Ethan stood tall, but I saw his hands tremble. "It's true," he said, his voice steady despite the storm. "Lucas and I are together." Richard's eyes flicked to me, cold and cutting. "You're a distraction," he said. "A liability." I wanted to snap back, but Ethan beat me to it. "He's my life," he said, and my heart ached with pride and fear. The fallout was swift. Richard demanded Ethan step back from the campaign, keep our relationship quiet until the election was over. "This isn't about you," Richard said. "It's about the bigger picture." Ethan refused, his voice rising. "I'm done hiding who I am. They argued, words like knives, until Richard slammed his fist on the desk. "You're throwing away everything I've built." Ethan grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the door. "No, Dad," he said. "I'm building something better." We left, the night air sharp against my skin. Ethan was quiet on the drive back, his hands tight on the wheel. At home, he broke. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, his voice cracking. I held him, feeling his sobs against my chest, and I realized how much he'd carried alone. "We'll figure it out," I whispered, but I wasn't sure. The blog post spread, comments piling up, some supportive, others cruel. Ethan's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. The next week was chaos. Ethan worked remotely, dodging calls from campaign staff, while I tried to keep us grounded. We cooked together, watched bad movies, pretended the world wasn't watching. But the pressure didn't let up. A local news outlet picked up the story, spinning it into a scandal. Ethan's mom called, her voice soft but firm. "I'm proud of you," she said, and I saw Ethan's eyes glisten. But Richard doubled down, issuing a statement about personal family matters that didn't mention me at all. It hurt, but I didn't say it. Ethan was fighting enough battles. One night, he came home with a plan. "I'm quitting the campaign," he said, his jaw set. "I'm done letting him control me." I stared, stunned. "Are you sure?" I asked. He nodded, pulling me close. "I want a life with you, Lucas." Not his version of me. It was a turning point, a declaration that felt bigger than us. But freedom came with a cost. Richard cut him off financially, emotionally. Ethan didn't flinch, but I saw the pain in his eyes, the loss of a father he'd never fully had. We leaned on each other, building a new normal. I took on extra tutoring to cover bills, while Ethan started freelancing, using his skills to consult on smaller campaigns. We were scraping by, but we were together. One evening, as snow fell outside, he pulled me onto the couch, his arms warm around me. "I'd choose you 1,000 times over," he said, and I believed him. But the world wasn't done with us yet, and a bigger storm was coming. Life without the campaign felt like breathing again, but the air was still thin. Ethan threw himself into freelancing, his laptop glowing late into the night as he built a new career from scratch. I admired his drive, but I worried. He was quieter now, the weight of his dad's rejection a shadow he couldn't shake. I tried to fill the gaps cooking his favorite meals, leaving notes on his desk, but some wounds don't heal with time alone. Spring brought a new challenge. My school was hosting a fundraiser, a community event to support the arts program. I was in charge, a role I loved, but it meant long hours and endless stress. Ethan offered to help, designing flyers and charming donors with that old Caldwell charisma. It reminded me of college, the way we'd sparred and sparked, but now we were a team. The night of the fundraiser, he wore a navy suit, his smile bright as he worked the room. I caught his eye across the crowded gym, and for a moment, everything felt right. Then Richard showed up. I saw him before Ethan did, his tall frame cutting through the crowd, his face a mask of determination. My stomach sank. Ethan froze when he spotted him, his hand tightening around a glass of wine. "What's he doing here?" he muttered. I didn't know, but I stayed close, my hand on his back. Richard approached, his smile practiced, political. "Ethan," he said, ignoring me. "We need to talk." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he nodded, leading his dad to a quiet corner. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding. Their conversation was heated, Richard's hands gesturing sharply, Ethan's voice rising. I couldn't hear the words, But I saw the moment Ethan's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. When he walked back to me, his eyes were dull. "He wants me to come back," he said. "Says he'll overlook us if I rejoin the campaign." The words hit like a punch. Overlook us. Like our love was a flaw to be tolerated. I waited for Ethan to tell me what he'd said, but he didn't. Instead, he threw himself into the fundraiser, helping until the last guest left. At home, he was quiet, staring out the window as I cleaned up. "What did you tell him?" I finally asked, my voice soft. He turned, his eyes searching mine. "I told him no," he said. "But he's not done, Lucas. He never is." I pulled him into my arms, feeling the tension in his body. "We'll face him together," I said, hoping I sounded braver than I felt. The next day, Richard escalated. A new article dropped, this one in a major outlet, painting Ethan as the rebellious son undermining his father's campaign. It twisted our story, calling our relationship a distraction from Richard's values. The comments were brutal, tearing into Ethan, into us. I saw the hurt in his eyes, the way he scrolled through them, unable to look away. "This is my fault," he said, his voice hollow. I grabbed his phone, tossing it onto the couch. "It's his fault," I said fiercely. "He's choosing power over you." Ethan's mom reached out, inviting us to dinner, a small gesture of support. We went, hoping for an ally. Ellen was warm, her eyes kind, but she was caught in the middle. "Your father's under pressure," she said, her voice tight. "He thinks he's protecting the family." Ethan's laugh was bitter. "By erasing me." The table went silent, and I squeezed his hand under the cloth, wishing I could take his pain away. We left feeling raw, but determined. Ethan started speaking out, posting on social media about our life, our love, refusing to hide. His words were raw, honest, and they resonated. Messages poured in support from strangers, old classmates, even a few of my students. It wasn't enough to drown out the hate, but it was something. We were building a community, a shield against the world. But Richard had one last move, and it would test everything we'd built. The final blow came in the form of a letter, hand-delivered to our apartment. Richard's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp and precise, like everything about him. Ethan opened it, his face unreadable as he scanned the pages. "He's disowning me," he said finally, his voice flat. "Says I've chosen a lifestyle over family. I'm out of the will, out of his life." He dropped the letter, and I caught a glimpse of the words, shame, disappointment, legacy. They burned into me, each one a wound on Ethan's heart. I wanted to rage, to drive to Richard's house and scream until he saw the man his son was. But Ethan needed me here, not fighting battles he wasn't ready for. I held him instead, his head against my chest, his breathing uneven. "I'm enough," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "We're enough." He didn't answer, but his arms tightened around me, and that was enough for now. The weeks that followed were a blur of survival. Ethan threw himself into work, taking on more clients, his focus relentless. I kept teaching, but my heart was at home, watching him rebuild from the ground up. We leaned on friends' old college buddies, my colleagues, people who saw us for who we were, not what the world wanted us to be. One night, my friend Sarah, a fellow teacher, invited us to a local LGBTQ+ meetup. "You need this," she said, and she was right. The room was full of stories like ours, of love hard-won, of families lost and found. Ethan relaxed for the first time in weeks, his laugh bright, his hand in mine. But the world outside wasn't kind. Richard's campaign leaned harder into division. His speeches laced with coded attacks on alternative lifestyles. Ethan's name was never mentioned, but the message was clear. It hurt, but it also lit a fire. Ethan started writing a blog, raw and unfiltered, about growing up under his father's shadow, about finding himself, about us. His words spread, picked up by activists, shared by strangers. I read every post, my chest swelling with pride. He was fighting back, not with anger, but with truth. One evening, as we cooked dinner, Ethan's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He answered, his face shifting from curiosity to shock. It was a reporter from a national outlet, wanting to interview him about his blog, about his dad's campaign. Ethan hesitated, glancing at me. I nodded, my heart racing. Do it, I said. Tell our story. He did, and the interview was a turning point. Published online, it went viral, a raw account of love, loss, and defiance. Ethan's Voice Our Voice reached thousands. The backlash was swift. Richard's campaign issued a statement, distancing itself from Ethan, calling his words misguided. But the tide was turning. Polls showed Richard's support slipping, voters turned off by his rigidity. Ethan's mom called, her voice trembling. I'm leaving him, she said. I can't stand by this anymore. She moved to Chicago, renting a small apartment nearby. And for the first time, Ethan had a parent who chose him. We started rebuilding, piece by piece. Ethan's freelancing took off, his clients drawn to his honesty. I got a promotion at school, leading the literature department. We talked about the future marriage, a house, maybe a dog. But the past wasn't done with us. Richard's campaign was faltering, and he wasn't the type to lose quietly. One night, Ethan got a text from his dad's number. Meet me, it said. One last time. Against my better judgment, we went. Richard was waiting at a diner, his face gaunt, his confidence gone. I want you back, he said, his voice low. I'll accept everything. Just come home. Ethan looked at me, then back at his dad. I am home, he said, and took my hand. We walked out, the night air cool, our future uncertain but ours. Richard's campaign collapsed a week later. The headlines brutal but honest. Voters didn't just reject his policies. They rejected his refusal to evolve. Ethan's interview had shifted the narrative, exposing the cost of his father's rigidity. Ellen, now settled in Chicago, became a regular part of our lives, her quiet strength a balm for Ethan's wounds. We'd have dinner together, her stories of a younger, softer Richard mingling with our hopes for the future. It wasn't perfect, but it was family. Ethan's blog grew into something bigger, a platform for others to share their stories, a space for healing. He was invited to speak at events, his voice steady, his blue eyes bright with purpose. I watched him at a local Pride event, standing on a small stage, talking about love as resistance, and I fell for him all over again. He wasn't just my partner. He was a force, carving out space for us in a world that didn't always make room. Our life settled into a rhythm, not without challenges. Money was tight, our apartment too small, but we made it work. We'd dance in the kitchen to old jazz records, argue over who made better coffee, steal kisses between grading papers and client calls. Every morning, I'd wake to Ethan's face, his blonde hair messy, his arms slung over me, and I'd feel a gratitude so deep it hurt. This was the man who'd once driven me to madness, now the one who made my world make sense. But love, even the strongest, needs tending. Ethan carried scars: his dad's rejection, the public scrutiny, and sometimes they showed. He'd get quiet, lost in thought, and I'd find him staring at old photos, his face unreadable. I learned to give him space, to trust he'd come back to me. And he always did, his hand finding mine, his smile a promise. I had my own fears losing him, failing him, but he'd pull me close, his voice steady. We're in this, Lucas. All the way. One evening, as summer faded into fall, Ethan came home with a small velvet box. My heart stopped as he dropped to one knee, his eyes nervous but sure. Lucas Hayes, he said, his voice thick. You were my rival, my challenge, my everything. Marry me. I laughed through tears, pulling him up, kissing him before I could say yes. The ring was simple, silver, perfect. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. Planning a wedding on a budget was chaos, but we leaned into it. Sarah offered her backyard, fairy lights and all. My students helped with decorations, their enthusiasm infectious. Ellen baked the cake, her hands steady despite her nerves. The day was warm, the sky clear, and when Ethan walked toward me in a tailored suit, his smile brighter than the sun, I forgot how to breathe. We said our vows in front of friends, chosen family, and a few curious neighbors, promising to fight for each other, to choose love over fear. The reception was a blur of laughter, music, and too much wine. Ethan pulled me onto the dance floor, his hands warm, his eyes locked on mine. You're stuck with me now, Hayes, he whispered, and I grinned. Good. I'd hate to win this one. We danced until midnight, the world fading until it was just us, two men who'd fought their way to this moment. As we lay in bed that night, rings glinting on our fingers, I realized something. Our story wasn't just about love, it was about defiance, about choosing each other against the odds. Ethan, my rival, my husband, was the man I woke up with every morning, and I'd fight for that every day. But life doesn't stop for happy endings, and ours was about to face one final test. The call came a year after our wedding, on a quiet Sunday morning. Ethan's phone buzzed, his mom's name on the screen. I was making coffee, the kitchen warm with the smell of hazelnut, when his face changed. It's Dad, he said, his voice low. He's sick. Cancer. The word hung heavy, a shadow over our bright morning. Richard had months, maybe less, and he wanted to see Ethan. We debated for days. Ethan was torn, his hurt warring with a need for closure. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from more pain, but I knew this wasn't my choice. I need to do this, he said finally, his eyes searching mine for strength. I nodded, squeezing his hand. I'm with you. The hospital was sterile, cold, the beeping machines a stark contrast to Richard's frail form. He looked smaller, his commanding presence eroded by illness. Ethan sat beside him, his posture stiff, while I stayed by the door, giving them space. I was wrong, Richard said, his voice weak but clear. About you. About him. He glanced at me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen. I wanted to control you, Ethan. I thought it was love. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he listened. I'm proud of you, Richard said, and I saw Ethan's shoulders shake, years of pain unraveling in those words. They talked for hours, tentative at first, then deeper about childhood, mistakes, forgiveness. I watched my husband, the man who'd fought for us, find a piece of himself he'd thought was lost. When Richard reached for his hand, Ethan took it, and I turned away, my throat tight. It wasn't absolution, but it was enough. Richard passed a month later. The funeral was quiet, attended by family and a few loyal supporters. Ethan spoke, his words raw and honest, honoring the man his father had been, flaws and all. Ellen stood beside us, her arm linked with Ethan's, her strength a quiet anchor. Afterward, we drove home in silence, the weight of loss mingling with relief. Ethan leaned against me that night, his voice soft. "I'm glad I went," he said. "Thank you for letting me." Life moved forward, as it always does. Ethan's platform grew, becoming a nonprofit that supported queer youth, giving them the community we'd fought to find. I published a collection of essays, inspired by our story, and my students cheered louder than anyone at the launch. We bought a small house, with a porch and a yard for the dog we'd always talked about, a scruffy mutt we named Whitman. Because of course we did. Our mornings became my favorite ritual. Ethan, still not a morning person, would grumble as I pulled him from bed, his hair a mess, his smile sleepy but warm. We'd make coffee, argue over the news, plan our days. Every glance, every touch, was a reminder of how far we'd come from rivals tearing each other apart to partners building a life together. One evening, as we sat on our porch, Whitman sprawled at our feet. Ethan turned to me, his eyes soft. "You know," he said, "I used to think winning meant being the best. Now I know it's thesis. Here, no matter what." I kissed him, the sunset painting the sky behind us, and I felt the truth of it in my bones. Love isn't a victory lap. It's a choice, made every day, through storms and sunlight. We weren't perfect. We'd fight. We'd falter. We'd face new battles. But every morning, I woke up next to Ethan, my rival, my husband, my home. And that was a story worth writing, worth living, worth fighting for.